the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors and those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stewards whose shoulders that we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So as I already stated, we do have a remarkable panel of sisters here today, and I'd like each of them to introduce themselves. So Kike, if you would like to go ahead and introduce yourself, please do.
Good afternoon where I am. Good morning, probably where some of you are, and good evening where some of you are. It is a pleasure to be here with you. I am Kike Ojo-Thompson, and I am the founder and CEO of KOJO Institute. We're an equity consultancy. We are 24 years old, and we support the public and private sector to achieve equitable outcomes for both their employees and their service users, clients, customers. I think that's it for now. And I use the pronouns she and her. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kike. And Celina, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm very grateful to be on this panel with all of you today, but with Kike Ojo-Thompson, my sister. Hi, Mike. How are you? Victor. My name is Celina Caesar-Chavannes. I use the pronouns she, her, and I would like to start by saying that I am speaking to you from my home in Whitby, which is the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, Williams Treaty First Nation, Curve Lake, Hiawatha, Georgian Bay, both Beausoleil and Rama First Nations. And as we have this conversation where we're talking about how she leads, I do want to acknowledge our ancestors of our Indigenous brothers and sisters and two-spirited people, his ancestors of African descent from across Turtle Island, who have allowed us and stewarded the land and allowed us to be here today. I am in transition. I'm not as eloquent as Kike in saying, you know, I own this company and I do this and I do that. But I'm in transition. I'm a consultant, most of the time a speaker, but I currently work part-time as a senior advisor for Queen's University and adjunct lecturer. And I'm a student. I'm doing my PhD in neuroscience, looking at the intersection of equity, compassion, or consciousness and leadership. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you definitely have a lot going on. So as she said, she'll leave it there for now. But my first question is actually for Kike. Kike, what are the most promising models in gender justice work that you've seen thus far in Canada?
Oh dear.
Jumping right in.
Yeah. I mean, models in Canada. I mean, I think that I would be disingenuous if I suggested that that Canada has successfully applied gender equity models. And, you know, I think, so I don't want to skirt away from the question. I want to attend to this conversation about models. But one of the things I want to say is that some of you might be thinking, well, of course, there's been some gender equity models that have been applied and have been successful because we've seen movement for women, positive movement forward for women. But I think that we need to look at our indicators, right? So what are we measuring? What are we, what measures are we utilizing to indicate progress and or success? And are those indicators a reflection of successful gender equity frameworks, you know, working, or is something else going on? So a couple things, you know, one is when we unpack which women, disaggregate the data around which women are seeing progress, we see that white women are distinctly and far out ahead of women of racialized women, Black women, Indigenous women, and so that begs the question, what is causing this kind of progress for them? Is it a gender equity framework because I am a woman? Or is it some sort of alignment or, you know, ability to align with some other part of the power structure that causes their forward movement? So, I mean, a really plain and harsh example is what we saw happen in the US election around white women voting for Donald Trump. I'm just using that as an example. So what you're seeing is the alignment with white supremacy, as opposed to to some sort of, anything to do with gender per se, right? So bringing it back to the question now around models, what I will and can say is that we need to be really critical about how we measure this progress and what the indicators of progress are, and obviously be really inclusive and intersectional in our approach around which women, and given the lack of progress for so many women, non-white women, it really stands to question whether anything has worked at all. I'll leave it there.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And we do have a bit of questions, so I am jumping right into it. But Celina, if you could weigh in on that as well, and what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think Kike covered it all. I would use a specific example from my previous work in the federal government, where they used a GBA plus model to analyze policy to ensure that there was an impact on gender. It's a gender-based analysis, and then a plus at the end. So there wasn't any impact specifically on gender for a very long time, and then they added the plus, and I'll get the exact dates to reference for you. The challenge with looking at a gendered approach to policy, especially ones that impact 37 plus million people in Canada specifically, is that when you're looking at it just from a gendered perspective, you're not taking into account how intersecting identities are oppressed. And so a single focus on gender is easy. And when I did write a 10-page summary of my critique of GBA plus and presented it to the minister, it was met with that response. Well, we can't analyze everything. Let's just do gender first. But how long do we wait for you to analyze gender? How long does pay equity for Black women still have to be 100 years before we get to pay equity? How long do we have to wait for Indigenous or Hispanic, Latina women, gender diverse folks, two-spirited folks to get equity? So if we're continuing to use the same model to look at then adding a plus to the end, as if the plus incorporates every other intersecting identity in a way that is unfair because you've predominantly held up gender, then how do we expect to have outcomes that are different? So if we're not challenging the system in a way that allows for those differences in outcomes, allows for an intersectional approach, allows for the poorest and most vulnerable among us to be lifted by particular policy or legislation, how then can we expect to see differences in what Kike mentioned earlier when we talk about the paucity of Black women, Indigenous women in C-suite positions, the paucity of Black and Indigenous women in board positions? And let's be clear that those kinds of metrics that tend to be held up as ones that we should look for, how many women do we have in C-suite, how many women do we have in boards, does not account for the fact that most women, especially when we look at what we've just been through in a pandemic, still don't have access to healthcare, still don't have proper ability to get paid a living wage, still don't have proper access to housing, still don't have access to a number of different justice and education initiatives that the first wave of feminism described as things that were important. So, I mean, we really need to peel back even when we look at the metrics, so to speak, what metrics we're looking at, who does it serve, and whose agenda does it further?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate it. And as we move on, in your lived experience, Celina, is gender equality, what are some of the best practices that you feel are essential within governance models in both the public and the private, as well as philanthropic sectors?
So I'm having a difficult time with the word models.
Okay.
I'm having a difficult time with the word models because typically we fit into these paradigms that, or models or structures that were never designed for by us, never included. We weren't even a whisper in the room. We weren't taken seriously when our suggestions were brought forward. And so we tend to talk about models as if we understand who designed or created those models in the first place, right? And what were their biases, what were their tendencies, what were their discriminations in those developments of the models. So, you know, I mean, I think when we think about essential models and we juxtapose that with the criticism that we see around critical race theory, around work that has been done for a very long time that centered Black women in the discourse around changing systems, we have to ask ourselves whether we want to use these models at all, because we're having we're hearing this discourse around remove critical race theory, remove critical theory, and then we have this discourse around, you know, the exclusion of Black women, Indigenous women from spaces, and then we say, what's the best model to use? That doesn't even make sense. So I think what we really need to be considering, and I was listening to Patricia Hill Collins speak in a YouTube video yesterday, and she was doing a panel with a young woman who had a book club, and they were actually analyzing her book on Black feminist thought. And what she said towards the end, and I'm trying to pull up my notes because I have a very, very poor memory on the things that we need to do going forward in terms of what's next, is to really talk with each other around what models, what practices, engage in dialogue around what we think will work. The traditional models that we're seeing, clearly, again, based on Kike's comments, based on the research, they're not working for especially Black and Indigenous women. So having that dialogue, and then talking across the diaspora, the way we heal, the way we love, the way we are energized, the way we work, the way we think about collective progress. There is commonalities across the diaspora that can lend to building structures or models that are better engage, that better lift, especially when you think about gender, intersectional approaches to gender, lift people, including gender diverse folks, out of situations that they are, and discuss the experience of marginalization and oppression around the world. And what does that look like? Because we tend to think of it from a perspective of the West. And when we look at folks in the global South, and I'm very particular to say folks because we tend to have this conversation and, you know, tend to really focus in on women when other folks are experiencing just as much exclusion as people who identify as women. But to look at those marginalizations and oppressions around the world and look at models that are able to lift through that dialogue.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. And Kike, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with my sister Celina. You know, I'm thinking about how we solve other issues in our leadership. So in our leadership walk, Celina and myself, in our work that we do, how we solve for other problems. And one of the key principles that I use or steps is to name what is happening. So I think one of the things that, you know, it occurs to me that Setsi is about, and I see that there are people in the continent here, hello, you know, there are people from all over the world tuned in, right? And so I'm centering Black women for a moment, or people who identify as Black women, Black people who are gender nonconforming or identify as women or trans women. And so I want to kind of speak to that for a second. And I want to attend to the patriarchy and the ways that, excuse me, patriarchy shows up in our spaces as Black people. And so if I switch hats, and so I'm KOJO Institute is an equity consultancy with an expertise in racial justice and race equity. So if I put my racial justice, race equity hat on, and I think about that work intersectionally, of course, one of the first things we do is name what is happening, what is occurring, who is doing what, and who has power. And, so if I was to build a model, which I think, Celina's kind of, sort of speaking to attend to this and center myself, not even just include myself, but center people who identify as Black women, then the first thing we need to do is name that patriarchy is here with us. We might run the mistake of thinking that the patriarchy is only something sort of operating in whiteness, or, and whilst the connection to whiteness and white supremacy is undeniable, we need to name how through that white supremacy, it's operating in and amongst Black countries, communities, spaces, organizations, efforts, initiatives. We can all kind of harken back to what we heard about the Black Panther movement, where the women were having an experience, right? So we need to be able to name the patriarchy in and amongst ourselves and unpack that, what enables that, or what causes that to persist, right? So what is the thing that is playing out, or how is power, what is the attempt at power there for Black people who identify as men, because we are absolutely having experiences as Black women with Black men, right? And individually, systemically, structurally, that's operating. And so I think it's time to unpack and provide space for people who identify as Black men to think about how patriarchy is operating for them. What is it that they're trying to do, get at, be, feel, experience? My analysis, and I'm open to being wrong, corrected, or added to, particularly by Black men, my analysis is that, power is, the quest for power is so, around us, so abundant, so ubiquitous, so constant. So what does it look like for people who identify as men who aren't white, right? Who do not benefit from white supremacy, to attempt to feel something, to feel that sense of power? I think we need to create more spaces to unpack power, patriarchy, what Black men are feeling, what they need, what they're trying to feel and access, so that we might have a critical thought about the way they show up to do so, and maybe start to build new pathways. I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. Really appreciate that. Thank you so much for breaking it down that way. And many of our sisters nationally and internationally have raised awareness about rest as a form of resistance. And as a leader, how essential is self-care and getting that rest that's necessary, both physically and mentally. How does that well-being impact your work? Kike?
It's everything. I can't even say enough. It's funny when you talk about leadership, right? We need to go back to unpacking what it means to be a leader, and really think critically about how we construct this concept, right? I was in a room with some city leaders for a city somewhere in Ontario, Canada here, and in the greater Toronto area, but a city in this area. And, I had them sort of articulate what are the characteristics of a leader. And so they did. And then we also thought about what leadership rooms have looked like, typically, at least here in the West, right? And they are white men. The rooms are full of white men. When we look at Canada's top 500 CEOs, the percentage that are women is still dismally small, much less. I don't even think there's a racialized person in the room, but certainly, racialized women is a whole other thing. Black women is a whole other thing, right? So, so the point I'm trying to make is, in order for us to normalize health and well-being, at least the way we would experience it, and give us room to be leaders, we have to unpack what leadership means. And we have to unpack how we define leadership and what we talk about as leadership, and really become critical again of how we define it. And if the definition includes, sober second thoughts and thoughtfulness and, accessibility, or, just another list, right? If those things were included, then rest is required, because you can only show up that way when you are rested, right? I don't know about you, but I'm way more thoughtful on vacation or right after vacation than I am while I'm in my drive, right? So I think there's so many constructs that we're living within and applying to ourselves. And this goes back to that piece about masculinity too, and power and access. It's the same conversation. We're living up to constructs that were, as Celina would say, weren't built for us in the first place, but we're not trapped, and we get to redefine them, and then show up in that newly defined thing, which is what this rest is resistance, thing is about, right? Show up in that way and show what kind of amazing outputs and outcomes can come from that restful, rested, newly defined leadership space. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you so much for that. And Celina, how do you feel?
First, let's just give a moment for that, because yes to everything that that my beautiful sister has said. I just want to put some context, and I'll put the reference in the chat for you. But McDougall, before I get to the question of rest, because this book is amazing, Rest is Resistance by Tricia Hershey. But to speak to Kike's point on the last little bit around, the numbers here, McDougall and his team reports that in Canada, 5.3% of TSX listed CEOs are women, and 7.4% of TSX listed board chairs are women. Of that percentage, 8.3 are listed as minorities, and of course that's the legal term that they use in Canada. So when we talk about that struggle, that challenge, that energy to exist and show up and be in these spaces, the rest is required. We need to disrupt. We need to, as Bell Hooks says, understand the beauty of the margins, because we understand the center and we understand the margins as well. But when we look at Tricia Hershey's book, she has 4 tenets of the NAP ministry, or rest as resistance. The first is rest is a form of resistance because it disrupts and pushes back against capitalism and white supremacy. So she's not just talking about, let's just take a nap, y'all, and it'll be okay. She's talking about it from a very specific perspective as a Black woman that operates within a society that says you need to do more, you need to do better, you need to do faster, you need to maintain the capitalistic status quo that has been generated since the enslavement, and perpetuated and started and catalyzed by the enslavement of African people. And so this is a very specific lens that she looks through. Number 2, our bodies, which we may have forgotten in this legacy of capitalism and colonialism and patriarchy. Number 2, our bodies are a site of liberation. Just drink that for a moment. Just drink. Sip it. Sip the fact that our bodies are a site of liberation. Number 3, naps, to Kike's point, because Kike is brilliant and she didn't need to read the book. I needed to read the book to understand this, but Kike did not need to read the book. My girl, naps provide a portal to imagine, invent, and heal. Man, ain't that a word? Let me get to number 4, our dream space. And I want y'all to please listen to this. Our dream space has been stolen and we want it back. We will reclaim it. I want to cry. We will reclaim it via rest. Our dream space was stolen and we want it back. It was stolen through what you said, Sister Brooks, right at the beginning.
through a system that did not show compassion, that did not see humanity through laborious work. But that's not where we began. We began when we were building pyramids and we were inventing mathematics and we were studying stars and birthing astrology and science and literature. So all this research that people are doing right now, they're researching for what we have already found. We are taking it back. What was stolen from us, we are taking it back. And so I want to be clear when we talk about rest and we talk about this movement that we're hearing so much about. We are just collecting interest on the debt that was already paid. Like we are the return on that investment, the return on our ancestral investment is what we are reaping the benefit of through our rest, but also through the work that Kike is doing, through the work that Victor is doing, through the work that probably many of you on the screen are doing. We are also reinvesting in so that those that come after us could reap the interest of our debt. Okay, but we're doing it in a different way. And so I just want to shout out to Trisha Hershey, who's been doing this work for a very long time, and express those tenets of the rest ministry.
Thank you so much. In the chat, they're saying the NAP ministry is real. I know there's probably a lot of people off camera, they're snapping. I'm being mindful that I'm not muted, but that was absolutely a word. We appreciate that so much. My next question is for you, Kike. As it relates to structural racism and anti-Black racism, systemic discrimination, I know you guys don't like the word model, so I'm just going to say what is necessary. What do you feel is necessary to genuinely advance justice? I'll put it that way.
Yeah. Oh, these are large questions. These are very big questions, you know, and I almost need like some kind of context, I guess. You know, there's sort of international justice. So when I think about the continent and of Africa, to be specific, when I think about the continent of Africa and I think about justice, I think about reparations. You know, the other day I was reminded that France receives 500 billion with a B dollars from the continent annually. And all I could think of was the ways that as a Black woman, I have been made to contend with narratives like welfare queen. How dare they? How dare they? And in the words of my good friend, Richard Picard, I need them to run me my money. I'm going to need them to run me my money. So the first thing that I want is reparations. We need to repair, and reparations and repair and justice is to make right what is wrong and what has been continued. All of the agreements in relation to the International Monetary Fund and whatever other else form they took need to be shredded, and reparations need to be made back. Shred them all. And that, you know, justice, you know, like, let's get to justice. We've not seen justice, and it's beyond policies and, you know, boardrooms and things like that. It's just, this is wrong, stop it, make it right. So that's the first thing from a global perspective, you know, even mindsets, right? So the readjustment of mindsets. We've got all of these models around, you know, charitable giving and philanthropy. Those things, charity and philanthropy suggests that, things are as they are sort of inherently, and we're going to send back to correct. It is not charity. It is not philanthropy. It's debt repayment, right? I mean, this is a different thing. When you get a loan from the bank and you send the money back that is due monthly, it's not called philanthropy. Right? It's not charitable giving, right? I mean, but the very narrative and the mindset it maintains the the Western supremacy, the white supremacy, the Northern supremacy. These things are maintained with this very language. I refuse to engage in that language without reminding people, oh, you gave to World Vision or whatever the cause. That's great, but that was your debt repayment. You're just touching your debt repayment, your debt owed from the centuries of exploitation and theft, frankly. And we need to name that, and we need to make that a more regular naming. So first things first, and this is just truth telling. I mean, this is nothing particularly special. It is truth remembering, truth naming, placing those truths in the middle of these conversations and beginning with those truths. And whether I'm talking to, a child, whether you're taking your little child to church and they're putting money in the offering plate, and the money's going wherever, you need to be talking about, what is built off of what and who benefits because of what and why we get to live like this, and all unpack that on a regular basis to start to disrupt. So there's that. But after, and if I bring it more sort of local and regional and contextual to, say, systems and organizations, then the conversation that we need to have there is, what is going on here and what is your belief about what you're seeing? So, when we talk about the fact that there are no women, there are not enough women, and if we unpacked Celina's stats of the 5.3 of TSX listed CEOs being women, and the 7%, 5.3%, and the 7% TSX board chairs being women, and we unpacked whether there were racialized women there, I think we would see dismal numbers. Black representation, Indigenous representation, dismal 1s, 0s, like whatever it is, right? And so I think if I stay on just mindset, right? So we have the first global mindset piece, but if I stay on this matter of mindset, is to unpack for people, why do you think that is? And if you follow the bouncing ball, what you'll find is that most people believe that those outcomes are the result of the inherent nature and capacity of the groups missing. That is the overarching, overwhelming thought process. Black people are not here because they cannot be, right? And here's how you know this is true. If this belief system wasn't the first and foremost and perpetual belief system among us, then you would see more leaning into an effort to correct the thing. The efforts are stagnated because the original belief system is, we've taken them as far as they can go. What more do you want me to toss into this pot to attempt to create change? That's wasting money, it's wasting time, it's wasting resources because they're at their max capacity. That belief system is rooted in the legacies that that we were left with as a result of the colonial project that continues, and the transatlantic slave trade, where it was necessary to define us as subhuman and thus incapable of higher order thinking, civility, et cetera, et cetera. That is the thinking that pervades and actually impedes and stunts the degree of change work and the effort and the energy put into change work, right? Now, which is the work that I do, and sometimes I feel like I'm on a treadmill, if you could perpetually prove over and over again that thinking is flawed, reminding people that some of the first universities on the planet were in Timbuktu, West Africa, right? Timbuktu is not a make-believe place as per Looney Tunes cartoons, but a real place where one of the first universities on the planet where Romans and Grecians came and sat at our feet to learn. I remind my white audiences of that regularly. Thus, the idea that we are not knowledge bearers, knowledge creators, interested in education is just categorically false. So if we can put that to bed, then we have to start to ask new questions about how we're here, why we're here, and what systemic practices are maintaining that, right? So what I'm getting at is there's too much zooming to the end and not enough taking care of the original thoughts and ideas that are holding people in place, yeah? We have to go back to unpacking, naming, and breaking open the original ideas, the problematic ideas that people are holding. Then they get into leadership and essentially practice out those same ideas with their limited approaches, their sort of lack of accountability holding, and that kind of thing is rooted in ultimately a belief that Black people are where they are, racialized people are where they are, Indigenous people are where they are, because this is their inherent max capacity. Right? The rest, if we can take care of that, the rest is gravy.
Wow. Well, I definitely figure out how to ask the questions because Kike had a word for us there. And I know Celina is there agreeing. So you've muted yourself. Please go ahead and unmute yourself.
No. Sometimes you just need to let things simmer.
Us. Listen.
That in a moment. This is, but I'm being very serious right now, because oftentimes when Black women speak, it is, that's great, let's go next point. No, let's just rest on that for a minute. I'll yield my time. I'll yield my time so that we could actually think about what it will take to starting back at the, I'm writing notes, starting back, and I hope you all writing notes, because I don't want us to have to repeat this again.
Come on.
Starting back at the original thoughts, not at the end when y'all done leaped up. Y'all done messed it up, and now you want to start at the end. Start at the beginning with the original thoughts. Break that apart. Break that apart. And I'm saying be quiet, but then you know me, I can't. My mouth does go and go and go. I can't finish. But to add, I will just add this. I will add this once the breaking apart is done. And again, I'm not using my words. I'm going to pull out from every book I could find where the late Bell Hooks said in Feminist Theory from Margin to Center, it is essential for continued feminist struggle that Black women recognize their special vantage point from our marginality that our marginality gives us, and make use of this perspective to continue to criticize the dominant racist, classist, sexist homogeny, as well as to envision and create something that is counter to it. So these systems that were created that didn't look like us, that weren't made for us, if we are going to do what my beautiful sister has already said, and start at the beginning and break that thought open, bringing new ones, right? When I was in Parliament, I would show up, and I dressed up for y'all today. I put on a pretty dress. But I still do have my head tie on. I had to like wash my hair, so I only unbraided the first 2 braids. But when I was in Parliament, I'd show up in my sneakers and my jeans and a t-shirt. Why? Because in 2015 to 2019, there was no dress code for women. So people might think, we're talking about this like these structures weren't made for us. Like if it's a dream or some kind of thing that we made up. There was no dress code for women from 2015 to 2019. So while men had to stand up and wear their suit or wouldn't be addressed by the speaker if they didn't have a tie on or their jacket on, I could stand up in jeans, sneaker, and a t-shirt because there was no dress code. Because it was never made for us. And it certainly was not made with the intention that Black women who speak up would be there, and Black women who show up and disrupt through their appearance would be there. So if we are going to take the time to crack open the thoughts, let us ensure that the recipe has a little bit of something else, a little nutmeg, a little, stuff that we bring, that has us in there, that is a representation of us. And I think Sister Kike has covered the rest of it quite eloquently.
She absolutely did. Thank you for adding that. And I noticed you made a reference to Bell Hooks, but in terms of any like justice, access, equity, inclusion, and diversity capacity building, are there any frameworks or individuals that inspire you, Celina?
Kike Ojo-Thompson. What? I mean, she's the queen of this work right now. And I want to be very clear when I say this, because I think I'm just going to change gears for a minute and talk about that inspiration, because it's not just inspiration. It is a real way in which we say that this particular model, this work that this particular individual through her organization is doing is something that I will endorse, right? So I get calls all the time to do anti-oppression work, anti-racism work, anti-everything kind of work. That is not my area of expertise. Sure, I could, put together a few things, cobble something together and have an excellent presentation, right? But that is not my lane. And the challenge with that is that it's a very scarce mentality. It's a mentality of scarcity, that because somebody called me, I need to say that I will do the work, knowing full well that this is not my lane to do the work in, that Kike Ojo-Thompson and KOJO Institute has a model that I know works really well, that I know will take you to the next step, that I know whether or not you choose to use me for the next piece, which is cultural transformation and business development, I know that she will and her team will get you to where you need to go. And if I can for a moment go back to Trisha Hershey's book, sorry, my list of moving things out of my maze in my mind, but she says that under a capitalist system is we need to confront the model of scarcity. This space makes you falsely believe that there's not enough for everything, not for everything, of everything, not enough money, not enough care, not enough love, not enough attention, not enough peace, not enough connection, not enough time. There is abundance. So when we continue to operate in a capitalist system and say, well, let me think of all the models that are out there, when my sister is sitting right here, if y'all looking for a model, she got one, period. Right? And that's a word. And so that is what I think we all need to do when it comes to thinking about or talking about ways in which we advance this work forward in a way that is tangible and practical and real, and ways that have accountability metrics, all the things that we know we don't get with other organizations that have models. We know that this one holds to account. We know that this one will make sure that there are metrics that are being measured that are real. And so I can't talk to you about the model. I'll pass it over to Kike because that's her lane.
If I may, I just want, first of all, sister, thank you. Thank you for allowing this time to be a healing time as well, as this opportunity for us to speak to all of these people. I love you for that, and when she leads, it is tough out here. When she leads, the energy of scarcity and competition, two core values of capitalism, scarcity and thus creating competition, is so fierce. And the picture of the basket of bread is so minuscule, especially as women, especially as Black women. So the typical experience is so much one that is full of aggression and harm, even amongst Black women in businesses that kind of rub each other, even if they're not the same, so it is so rare to hear this kind of loving endorsement. And I just want to acknowledge you for that, Celina Caesar-Chavannes. I love you for that. Thank you. And just, the reality of everything you said is so true. The scarcity and competition model that leads to the lack of balanced, like showing up in a balanced way to this work, that leads to the exhaustion, that for us leads to attacks on our reproductive systems. Like so many women, Black women, the first point of unwellness, of dis-ease, is something to do with our reproductive systems. We've got to step above and look at this from 10,000 feet above and understand that we weren't built for this. We were not built for this. And so what does that mean, right? What does that mean for us? How do we have a life, because we're here, and sort of exist and thrive in the face of the global capitalist, patriarchal, white supremacist, anti-Black structure that we have. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you so much for that. And as a fertility doula, I couldn't agree with you more. I'm predominantly seeing women of color, Black women. So I couldn't agree with you more. That's definitely one of the first ways that I think we experience it, but don't know we're feeling it, right? And needing the rest. My next question is for you, Celina. What is the importance of eldership and intergenerational collaboration in Black communities across Canada?
Oh man, this is an important one. But there is, I'm struggling a little bit to answer eldership. So let me just start with eldership. Number one, we are not the first ones to do this work. There are people that have come before us upon whose shoulders we stand on. And I remember citing in writing a love letter to Black women in 2018. And in that love letter, just really positioning myself as someone who comes from, I come from a neurological research background. I ran clinical trials and co-chaired national epidemiology studies. This work around justice, around liberation, around any of this was not necessarily part of my day-to-day. It was more my husband that was really involved in some of this work. And so showing up in Parliament and really talking about race and justice and things like that, you know, had its moments, but it also made me really think about my position as someone coming into this space and sort of dominating the conversation. And I think this goes back to the previous comments that I made around KOJO Institute, like just taking up space where other people have been in that space for a very long time. And all of a sudden the spotlight is on you. And so you need to then say, I'm going to dance in the spotlight, not even knowing what song is playing. So the elders are able to say, hey, child, you're off beat, number one. Number two, wrong song. Number three, get some shoes on because you're wearing the wrong shoes. Number four, that dress ain't matching it. Number five, they're able to give you the context, the history, the gems that are required for you to know where you are and then to know where you're going. The challenge I had at the beginning with answering this question is that I think that there is a generational, possibly with some, I'm not trying to paint everybody under a blanket, with how we respond, or how I in particular respond to movements around justice and how maybe some of my elders would. I know 100% that I cuss, I drink, I party too hard, I'm way too loud. And that might not be appreciated. In fact, it is not appreciated by some of our elders, but I disrupt in a different way. And so when we think about disruption, it is a strategy of disruption. It is not one particular way of doing things. It is those that are quieter and continue to work at their desk, do the 9 to 5, but slowly and ever so gently nudge ourselves toward progress. Then there are the sisters that started Black Lives Matter, that are in the streets protesting, standing in the cold in front of legislative buildings. And then there are those who are a little bit more vocal, but don't want to get involved necessarily in calling people out or protesting. And then there are the Celinas that don't mind calling people out. And so I think when we think about the generational sort of challenges, even thinking about the difference between myself and my mother, we were all disruptors. We all were. When my parents moved here, that was a disruptor. Come from Grenada, a tiny island, smaller than the town that I represented in Whitby. Like the population of Whitby is bigger than Grenada. Hence, I can run for Prime Minister of Grenada, but I digress. But them moving here was disruption.
and they came here to make a better life for their children. My disruption being here is to continue that legacy of making a better life for my children. So using their example and doing it in my sort of way, that is call out, that is loud, that is not being, the polite, be grateful that you're at the table and, be seen and not heard. I will be heard. I will disrupt. I'm aggressive. I'm not easy on the, I'm rough around the edges. And I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to push. And so I think that there is a generational difference, but I hope in the conversations that we have with elders, or that I have with elders, that there's still that respectfulness, that reverence that is owed for the work that they put in.
I absolutely love how you put that. You said they can help us to read the room, but at the same time, we're all disrupting in a different way. And I think each generation gets a bit more radical than the last. So I really appreciate the way you put that. Kike, how do you feel?
Well, I just want to first remind people of where to read that love letter to the community. This book is always right behind me on my bookshelf. You can't see it based on the angle of the camera where it sits, but it's always right behind me, every day, all day. So if you have not read Can You Hear Me Now, you should grab it. It is Celina's story. And as she said, in it, she pens a love letter to the community of Black women in particular whose shoulders we absolutely stand on. And, I know that, Celina and I are very close in age, and I know that we can't fathom some of their arrival, that first wave of arrival to this area that we both live in, and what that would have been like. So we know that they've paved just ways for our presence alone, much less our audaciousness. This matter of eldership is so interesting. I was talking to an Indigenous woman who does not define herself as an elder, but she calls herself a grandmother. Grandmother so-and-so is her name. And she said, I think that while I was talking to her, I felt myself sort of grieving in the background and quietly for how significant our loss of cultural awareness, knowledge is, the state of our lack of cultural knowledge and awareness as African descent people around the diaspora. We are simply and thoroughly disconnected from the information of the ways of even honoring elders, or the concept in its fullness. Like we're basing our sort of interactions based on the word elder and what it should mean, but there's so much missing for us. And I think that the point of an elder was that we were supposed to be taught ways, provided for, shown ways, and then respect this thing. But there's so much broken about our whole existence today because of the disruption. Like, we talk about Black history. Well, our history was long before the transatlantic slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade interrupted our flow, interrupted our lives, and interrupted our existence, right? So I really think about that a lot when I think about this idea of eldership. But either way, what I know, what I believe, what I understand, my father is Yoruba, so I'm half Yoruba nation and half Trinidadian, so not sure all of my African roots on my mother's side. But what I learned from my father and being connected to my father's people, is that eldership is something that is given to you. And I think there's something really beautiful and profound there. It's not there can be an age that it clicks over, but it can also happen because it was dawned on you. You were given eldership. And I think that's a really great thing to remember. And I think it's something that we need to harken back to and really kind of cling back to this concept of eldership and how it can be helpful to us. I know that wasn't a profound answer, but just some thoughts I wanted to share about this concept of elder, because that have been just sort of, moving around in my head. So yeah.
No, absolutely. We would definitely appreciate that. And Kike, if you want to answer this final question, what call to action do you have for Black communities across Canada?
To care. There's a couple, right? So, that we've been consumed and subsumed and just sort of eaten inside of the system. And, I don't even say that like heavily critically, is, this survival, right? Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, belonging. People are just trying to survive this disruption that we're all like, we've been a part of a project or a experiment of disruption for 500, 600 years, right? So I don't say it critically, but I need more of us to, I hope that more of us will have the space to look up and notice systemic issues. I can't tell you how many times I talk about systemic issues, talk about white supremacy, and Black people are offended, and Black people want to protect the status quo and protect white supremacy and fight to uphold it for 10 different reasons, who knows. That needs to stop so that we can take the few of us that there are here, particularly in the West. I can't speak for the continent, that's a slightly different context or a very different context. But certainly here in the West, it's the mentality of white supremacy and patriarchy, et cetera, and the real live constant day-to-day management of those things every day, like touching you, viscerally around you. So, and the second thing I want to say, so, I need us to find the opportunity to break and care about this systemically and find each other to undo it. But the second thing is, and I've had to say this to so many Black leaders, so people that have arrived at CEO and these sorts of just influential people, right? I've had to say, be Black. And what I mean by that is when you get to that place of leadership, that you would choose to be Black there and not to not be Black, right? There's too many people, sorry, my eye is attacking me, my eyelash. There are too many people who think that getting to that place is the time to sort of disassociate themselves from their identity or from the cause or from the issues or from their concern about Black issues, Black life, anti-Black racism. And, they think that being the leader is to be essentially to perform whiteness. And if we're frank, they performed whiteness to get there. And so my message to them is, I got that, I get that, and I understand that. But now that you're here, be Black, because the board members that put you in that place, that hired you, high-fived themselves, patted themselves on the back when they successfully hired a Black person. Go and be Black when you get there. That is my message. That's my final word. Go and be Black when you get to leadership.
And then we have the perfect follow-up to that, someone who continued to be Black when she got into the right rooms. So if you haven't got the book, go read her book. It's very necessary. And Celina, what are your closing thoughts on call to action for the Black communities across Canada?
First, thank you, Kike, for that, for the shameless plug. I appreciate you so much. Whenever I'm with you, I always feel like I'm going to cry. You're just like I always think that we're not the same age. I treat her like my little sister, and I don't know why. I should start making you a cook when you come over here. She comes and she like orders I want bruschetta, I want this, I want that. Like she puts an order.
She cooks, I eat. That's how
it actually drives me crazy.
Yeah.
But I love care. I love care. I love care. I love the compassion. But I think we also need to remember too, and Kike was very eloquent in talking about a number of different issues within the diaspora and here. And I want us to think about how old we are. Yesterday was the independence of Grenada, where I'm from. I'm 49 years old. Me and Grenada are exactly the same age. So we want these nations who have literally, they're younger than my parents, most of them, to have everything right. And we're all supposed to be all sorted. And all kinds of things are supposed to be done in the right way. And, we're supposed to be okay. You don't see the problems America's You don't ever see problems established nations have had knowing that they are raping and pillaging nations that look like us, and you want us to just be able to stand? I think we just need to extend ourselves grace. along with the caring, extend ourselves, extend our community, extend our homeland's grace. We're trying to figure it out, and we're tripping and falling along the way. But everybody tripped and fell along the way. When we think about the challenges in our community, we use terminology, and Kike talked about this earlier. We use terminology, Black on Black violence, and please stop. We got to really stop. The system works exactly the way it was designed to work. And if it is working exactly the way it's designed to work, we need to interrogate it. We need to think differently about it. We need to extend ourselves the grace when the system says, you will fall now because we've designed it so. And then we're so hard on ourselves for falling. Grace is what I have to say. And if we could move with grace with each other, with ourselves, with our communities, with our allies, then I think we could get to a point where we're not having this conversation just about justice. We're having a conversation about creativity and innovation, and we're using our energy not to chase our own tail, but to actually live and thrive and inspire. That's where we need to get to.
Wow. Thank you, ladies. I don't think we've ever heard it quite like that. The call to action for the Black community is to, one, care, two, continue to be Black when you get into some spaces of power and influence, and third, to also have grace, because as you said, the system's kind of working against us. So grace. I appreciate that. Thank you so much, both of you ladies, remarkable. I love the dialogue today. Thank you for everyone who showed up today and stayed all the way to the end. We have gone a little bit older, but we do want to close this session the same way we started, by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands that we are on. We also want to acknowledge our ancestors and those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and the community stewards whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Again, thank you everyone for coming in today.
Thank you.